friends, and welcome to Little Giant Crafts. So recently, my wife got, I really don't remember, some sort of electronic appliance or something or other, but it came with some really cool cardboard packaging that I thought would make really good sci-fi walls. So, let's see what I did. The idea for this build came primarily from the shape of the packaging itself. It felt like a very futuristic, sort of concrete wall you might find in like a very dystopian setting. And the little add-on bits that you'll see later, most of them are pretty self-explanatory, but I also really wanted to do some neon lights, sort of like very futuristic, like cyberpunk look. I'm not normally a big fan of the whole cyberpunk aesthetic, but for neon signs, I feel like it's kind of a must. Now, originally, I was just going to skip this step because the only plan was to, paint the walls gray like concrete. However, the packaging itself, and you'll see this in a few minutes once we get to the footage, but the ends had these little flaps that fold up and onto the, well, I'll just call them the walls. And I cut them off, but I saved them because the way they attached to the walls, I figured they would be good add-ons for something that I might want on some of the time, but not permanently. I wasn't going to actually build them for this video because I hadn't really come up with any ideas, but after I started painting the walls, I did come up with some ideas, and I went back and started planning out what I would build for the clip-ons. So first I'm just drawing the general shape of it and drawing a quick wall. Like I said, that's just going to be gray, so there it is. So after I drew this sort of angled view to get the shape of it, I decided that would be a lot of work, so I'm just going to draw straight on and side views. So I draw that, and then I copy it a few times because I have 4 of these pieces, so that gives me 4 options I can make. Now the first one I decided to just do a simple ladder because the walls are thick enough that figures can stand on top of them, and if you're going to climb a wall, why not have a ladder? And then I'll probably add some little rivets just to make it look a bit more mechanical. Maybe a little electrical box on the side, just some little details. Now the idea that I was most excited about, these have, this inner shape that I didn't want to just cover it up for all of them, so I was trying to figure out what I could use this shape for when the idea hit me to do a newsstand, like the kind you see on, street corners in the big city. So here I'm just sort of, come up with some ideas. Here's like a row of newspapers, and then maybe like some little cans. Now I drew a guy in there just to give myself a sense of scale. I don't plan on putting a figure in there. I think it'll be cramped as it is, but I just wanted to, remind myself I was drawing a newsstand. Now the next piece is the neon signs I mentioned. I figured if this wall is in maybe a more commercial district, you got some signs, some advertisements, maybe this, one big primary sign and then some little ones all around it. So here I'm just doing some random things. I'm not going to follow this exactly. It's just sort of, to give myself an idea of, the general aesthetic it's going to look like. For the last one, I decided to do a sort of, not like a fort or a bunker, but just like a little command post. If we've got the ladder and people are already climbing the wall, then I figure it could be like a military checkpoint, or just a guard post where someone's keeping watch with some little lights on the side. Maybe some angular sci-fi shapes, some caution lines on the bottom. And then after I colored in some of the details, I decided to just color the whole thing, just to give me a feel of what the paint jobs would look like. Obviously the neon signs will be, very bright and colorful. But yeah, pretty simple plan. Now, admittedly, I did start at the very beginning of this project before I started filming Little Giant Crafts, and then I sort of set it aside. But all I did was put some newspaper into the bottom. Yeah, I just sort of, stuffed it to give it some extra stability, even though it's pretty solid. And then I cut some pieces of chipboard and hot glued them to cover up the hole. There's Captain America for scale. I hadn't really decided on the shape of the base, but I decided to just go very simple and follow the shape of the piece itself. So I'm just cutting the corners off of the chipboard to line it up with the larger piece. And now here we start building the add-ons, and like I said, I came up with this after I started painting, so that's why the walls are already gray, but you'll see that in a bit. Anyway, here are these interesting little shapes. I start by trimming off some of the little extra cardboard bits. And then I'm just tracing the shape onto chipboard and cutting it out so I can, cover up the hole. Now I'm working on the sort of guard outpost, so I get some, scrap bits of foam board, and I'm going to cover up the top. So I just, cut that out, hot glue it on top. And since these fit onto the walls themselves, I check the fit pretty often. I don't want to, cover up the part that fits onto the walls and mess it up and defeat the purpose. So now I'm sort of just playing around with some more foam shapes and size, and gluing some more foam on top. So I cut this piece out, and this is going to be the main shape. It's sort of a little bit of a walkway that extends over the wall. And then I glue that down with tacky glue. So I actually take a brief detour from building to paint this part of the foam because I'm going to cover it with cross-stitch mesh, and it's just really hard to paint through all the little holes, so painting it first is just a little easier. So now I'm sort of using, some figures for scale to see how big I want the outpost walls to be, like how much I want you to be able to see over it. And then once that's done, I just start, gluing some pieces to the side, building out the shape of it. And most of this is all done with hot glue because it's, nice and quick, which is, I'm gluing a lot of pieces, so I don't want to wait for everything to sit. So then I take these corner pieces from a box, and I'm going to cut them. I basically want the hinge, the fold that's already in the box, because I'm going to use it to cover up the joints in the outpost, so it looks more like a solid piece. Yeah, so here you can see me using the corners to cover it up. And then I'm just adding some little bits. One really easy way to make sci-fi shapes is, take a rectangle and just cut the corners off. And then another thing you can do is, again, take rectangles and sort of do like an angled slice. And then, just pull them apart a little bit. And, that's how I'm gluing them on. And it's just a really easy to make shape that gives a very good sci-fi feel. So now I'm working on the ladder, and what I'm using for the ladder itself is just part of a cheap hair curler. You can get like packs of these at the dollar store. So I just cut out, a vertical strip, and I cut all the little nubs off, sand it down, and it makes a really good ladder. I was tempted to 3D print a ladder for this, but since this is still one of my first videos, I want it to be more, approachable for someone that doesn't have a 3D printer, and I also didn't feel like waiting to actually print it. Then I just, get some other random bits that I think might be good. This little white cube will make like a good power box. And then I glue some wires down. These are just old headphone wires. Whenever you need wiring in, a small piece, if you have headphones you're not using anymore, or even just like get a cheap pair from the dollar store and cut them up. They make really good sized wires. And I just add some rivets and other little bits. For the signs, I got an idea I was really excited to try. So if you've ever built a plastic model kit before, you know the pieces come on sprues. What I did was cut out a bunch of the labels, and they are rectangular and have, words on them, but the important thing is that the words are raised so they can be painted and the detail will still come out. So I thought these would make perfect signs. So I cut a bunch out and I just started playing around with, where I want them to go. I wanted one really big sign like I had in my drawing. So I put 2 pieces of cardstock to make that sign, and I'll just hand paint that later. But for the rest of them, I'm going to use the words that are actually on it. And, I have to do some sanding, some trimming, and sort of, a lot of crafting, especially this type where you're just doing like little details and stuff. It's just playing around and, seeing how things look, seeing what you like before gluing it down. And then the little pipe bits are also pieces of sprue that just look neat. And I'm just playing around to give it, a little extra detail. All right, so once most of the signs are in place, I decide to add some bead rivets. I use these beads all the time for this purpose. It's just, adds a nice little level of detail. And then again, testing the fit to make sure it works. So for the newsstand, I put some foam board on the sides to give it a more, even look and not have the front sort of just hanging over the edge. And I'm sort of just, gluing chipboard to the side to box it up, make it look like one solid object again. Now I just start going through my bits and looking for anything that might look good at a small product that might be on the shelf of a newsstand. So I get a lot of little things. I decide to make cans of soda by cutting another piece of sprue into little, roughly even sizes, can-shaped. You can see here. Cutting off some other random bits. At a scale this small, I don't know what every object is meant to represent, but I think it'll just look good once it's all together. So I cut these little bits out of headphones, and I think they'll make good lights. So I attach them to the little outpost. I cover up the back a little bit because you can still see it when it's on the wall. And again, I just want it to look like, one solid room. Then I glue some just little pipes on top, maybe to vent smoke or whatever he's got going on in there. So now I'm gluing on the mesh. I just take some tacky glue and spread it around and then, hold it down and I use my ruler to push down all the corners, make sure it's really in there, and then just let it dry. All right, time to paint. And I definitely painted everything at once. Since these walls have a really good texture on them, I'm mostly just going to be dry brushing it. So the important thing with dry brushing is to have a dark color on the bottom and then a lighter color you can dry brush over it. So to start, I just paint the whole thing in black. Once that's done, I get my normal gray that I use for all my concrete sort of buildings, and I just start dry brushing. And you can already see right away it leaves the recesses black, and you get a really good texture out of it. And then, of course, I got the idea to build all the other bits, and I took a short break from painting. But then once that was done, here I'm doing the same thing for all these pieces, just basing them in black. Doing some more coats of gray on the walls. And then I also start cutting out little square pieces of chipboard. I find this is good to make very simple like books. In this case, they will be newspapers, but depending on how you paint it, they also make really good, tiny books. Also at this point, I had the idea to instead of painting the soda cans, I've got these multicolored bits of masking tape, and they are about the same width, so I decided I would just wrap the little cans in tape instead of painting them, and I'm pretty happy with how it came out. I decided to do, a few cans of Coke, one Pepsi, and a Mountain Dew. A little variety. So now I'm painting the newspapers white. I decided to make the newsstand green. Looking at some reference images, I found a green newsstand that just feels like very classic, archetypal newsstand, so I went with green. I also decided, rather than glue everything in and try to reach the paintbrush in and paint every little tiny thing without, getting paint all over the place where I didn't want it, I decided to paint the inside of the newsstand, and then I would glue in the pieces separately. At this point, I remembered to glue a bead on the door for the doorknob to get in on the side, so I glued that on. Then I decide the white is too bright for the newspaper, so I go with the sort of cream color, just to make it look like, aged paper gets kind of yellow. Newspaper as it is, I guess it's more of a light gray, but I thought the cream was a good color. At this point, I just went outside quick to prime the pieces because, especially the plastic sprues, that material definitely does not take paint very well, so I didn't film it because I just ran outside really quick. But then I continue, painting everything in black. At this point, we go back to building for a minute because I remembered that I wanted to cover up the little holes on top of the wall, just because a figure's base can fit on there, but it's, a little uneven, so I'd rather just have a flat surface. So I just cut a shape out of chipboard, measuring the size of the wall, and then Just clip off the corners again to give it sort of a, more sci-fi feel, and then glue some rivets on top. So then I go back to painting. I sort of just give everything a few layers. Then I start painting the silver bits, the ladder, most of the outpost, some bits of the neon signs. I'm sort of just going back and forth at this point, painting one thing, letting it dry while I paint another thing, going back and forth. I mark out a little spot that I'm going to paint black to represent where the person would stand in the newsstand. Then I also paint the flat bits on top of the wall silver. I figure they can be metal that was, added on top of the wall instead of part of the wall itself. Now that the interior of the newsstand, now that the paint is dry, I can start gluing in the other bits. And I just use a tweezer to sort of get in there because my fingers definitely couldn't hold these tiny little things. I also paint some, just very thin lines on the newspaper to represent writing. And then I glue those in. Then I take some more tape and mask out a square to be the sign of the newsstand, and I'm going to go with a yellow. Now what I'm doing for the signs is, in addition to all the sprues, I've got a few just little pieces of chipboard that are blank, and I look up some reference material and just sort of freehand paint a few shapes to represent signs, like a martini glass and an arcade. And then I'm going to write some words. But what I usually do is cut out a little piece of paper that is the same size as my, canvas. So that way I can figure out the size of the word and the spacing before I paint it, because, you don't want to paint a word too big and only have room for half of it, or, paint too small and have a lot of empty space. For the big sign, I decided to go with the Japanese characters for Godzilla. Once I've got a good idea of the size, I just paint it on. Painting some details on the little things in the newsstand and the word news. Now at this point, to get the glow effect on the lights, I decided to use my airbrush, but I don't have a really great setup right now, so I didn't film it. But basically what I did is just took the airbrush and put color over all the bits of the signs that would light up. And then I'm just going to go over it again later with white. I only used red and blue. I was going to use pink, but for whatever reason, the pink I had did not cooperate with the airbrush. It was really weird. But here you can see, now it's been painted. I also did the yellow lights on the outpost. And now I'm just going back over all the signs with white. So here you can see I'm redrawing the shapes, and I sort of go between dry brushing the letters on the sprue and sort of just painting them by hand. It looks weird up close, but from far away it already, it already starts to look brighter. And it's just good to have the white in the middle because it's like, the most intense part of a light. If you think of a lightsaber, how it's color all around, but the middle is white, it's sort of the same idea. This is a very tedious process, mostly because I don't want to accidentally paint any part of the sign that's not the words themselves. So it's just slow going. You just have to be patient, which I'm not always good at, but it gets there. Then I decide I want to do some graffiti on the walls. Graffiti, I mean, you can go very detailed and spend a lot of time on it, but I have a very simple sort of style. I just look up some graffiti sort of fonts, and then what you want to do first is make the shape you're going to make in black, but make it larger, if that makes sense. Like, you have to imagine the black is going to be the border, so you have to imagine sort of a puffy shape around. You want to make it bigger than it's going to be, basically. So then while I wait for that to dry, I decide to write Bad Wolf on the other wall. Doctor Who fans will get that reference. And this one, it's not like fancy graffiti, so I just write it out. And then I just make some little vertical lines going down to represent like paint dripping where the spray paint was maybe too thick. Just an easy little touch. So now that the black is dry, I decide I want to do colors that sort of mimic the logo of the show. So I get a bright green, a teal sort of color, and a bright blue. So now I'm making the letters again the actual shape I want them. So if you can see here how the black borders the green, hopefully that makes sense when I was saying, make the black a little bigger than you want the final shape to be. So instead of doing a nice transition like the logo, I decided to do just one color for each letter. And then while I wait for that to dry, I start the caution lines on the outpost. I mark it out with masking tape. And I know it's going to be yellow, but hear me out. Some colors, like yellow and especially orange, they have a tendency to not be very strong. What I mean by that is when there's only a few coats, you can still sort of see, what's underneath it. So you need a lot of coats to build up that color. Now, a really great trick I've learned for painting orange is to paint pink underneath it. Paint pink first, and then paint orange on top of that. And what that'll do is make the orange a lot more vibrant with less coats. And since this is going to be yellow, I decided to try, the same technique with yellow to see how it would work. So while that's drying, I just go back and touch up the letters a little bit. Again, add some little vertical lines to look like paint dripping. All right, once the pink's dry, I go over it with yellow. Once you're happy with the shape of the letters, one final touch I really like is to add a thin white line on the bottoms. So if you're thinking of the letters as like a three-dimensional object where, the tops are like facing away from you and the bottom is facing towards you, I'll draw a little graphic to put on screen here to explain better what I mean. But on the bottoms, I just like to do a thin line of white, and it just sort of, it makes it look a little more three-dimensional, and I feel like it's a cool graffiti style I've seen. Then I just do a few more coats of yellow, and then, sort of cleaning up all my lines. Then I go back to painting the little bits inside the newsstand. We also got a new C-stand, which is basically like a tripod, but the dog likes it. You might be wondering what this folder is. You're gonna find out soon. Here I'm just putting more finishing touches on the newsstand, some little metallic bits, Like I said earlier, I don't specifically know what all of these objects are meant to represent, but as long as it looks diverse, it sort of, makes sense from far away. Now that I've done enough coats of yellow, it's time for the black. So I take the masking tape and put my first one diagonally, and then I have an extra bit of masking tape to measure the distance between stripes, so that way, both colors are even. And then I lay down another one, and I just keep doing that until I have the whole thing covered. And then I go in with the black. I do yellow before black because yellow over black would take a lot of coats to cover, but black over yellow just takes like, one or two because it's so dark. I paint the rivets on the metal a lighter silver so it stands out a bit from the sort of gunmetal darker metallic. All right, once the black is done, it's time to peel off the paint, which is usually my favorite part because, you know, you can just see it right away. And then I'm just cleaning up a little bit of the lines where it went over, just a drop, but I'm really happy with it. It looks good. Now, in the folder are posters. Posters are a great way to add, you know, character and help sell the scale of a piece. So I found a few online that were like Warhammer themed, but I also wanted some generic ones. So I made a sheet in Photoshop. I'll probably put a link in the description if you want to download it. Just some movie posters, some propaganda posters, some like Nuka-Cola from Fallout. I put like a voltage, like a danger high voltage sign on the next to the ladder. And I just start cutting out some other signs that I think will be good. And these, I just glue them on with tacky glue, you know, just spread it around a little bit. And, you know, as always, just sort of, you know, play around, see where you want them before you glue them down. So I'm cutting out a lot of posters for the walls. And, you know, just sort of putting them at various heights, like they were attached at different times. Some were put on top of others, you know, that sort of thing. Just think of like, try to imagine like what order they were put there. I like to do a few duplicates. Sometimes like maybe someone had a stack of flyers and just hung up a bunch of them right next to each other. You know, different sort of things just to like try and tell a little story. You can tear them up a little bit. I put the torn corner in the bottom, like it, you know, the wind blew it up against the wall after it fell. And then I also decided to do an extra little bit of graffiti over one of the posters so you can sort of see like the progression of time. You know, like a poster got put up and then someone painted over it. And then the last step is weathering. Now I've got black and brown weathering powders, and admittedly I put them on a little heavy here, but it just makes things look dingy and dirty and grimy, and you know, it really feels like an old sort of object. For most of it I'm just using black, but then also for the metallic bits I'm using brown because it ends up looking rusty. Normally I would use like brown and orange paints, but since this was a faster build and I just wanted to finish it, I just, you know, used the brown pigments. The only thing to keep in mind is that they make a big mess. I forgot to say this in the outro, so I'll say it here, but if you're enjoying the series, please consider subscribing to the channel, and you can check the description below for links to what else we're working on, and if you'd like to support us. Thank you. But, that's it. So let's see the result. This is Cleanup Crew Delta. I know you called in an incident report, but we're not seeing anything. Wait a minute. This is Bravo team, we've got a visual. Can confirm containment breach. I repeat, containment breach. So there you have it. I gotta say, considering how little I planned on doing going into this, I'm really pleased with how they came out, especially the newsstand and the neon signs. I'm really happy with that sprue label bit idea. I think I'll definitely be using that in the future if I need any more signs. So overall, I'm really happy with it, and super easy. Always keep an eye out for weird shaped packaging. It's really one of the best crafter's supplies you can get for free. Well, that does it for today. So, until next time, be creative, be kind, take care of yourself. I like that you turn a blinding light on and then tell me not to squint.
I know. I could turn it off if you need me to.
What should I need like a transition-y thing. Like, let's get crafting. Let's get crafting. So, let's see. So, let's get crafting. So, let's take it away, keyboard cat. That's it for today. So, until next time, I remember. That's it for today. So, until next time, be creative, be kind. No, I'm not gonna point. Maybe I'll point at the last one, but not the whole.